Okay, good evening. Welcome to our City Council meeting for Wednesday, October 8th. We will start tonight with a Pledge of Allegiance by Andrew Lawrence.
Will the audience please rise and salute the flag? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. And we'll go to 4.2, City Council comments and recognitions. Anything from council tonight? Howell?
You can talk about the how.
We'll talk about the how.
Sure. I wasn't even there. Nobody saw me. The Harriman Howl we had on Monday night, it was amazing. It was, thank you, event staff. I don't think any of you guys are here, but I know you guys watch it. So we really appreciate the time and effort it was put into. We had a significant amount of people throughout the evening. The weather was beautiful. Lots of new additions of events and opportunities to partake of the evening last night or Monday night. So thanks event staff for that. And
all the departments, all the
yeah, well, yeah, and then we had police and fire and parks, and everybody was out there, so awesome. And then also thanks Shelly for this awesome tour she helped out with this morning with the Salt Lake
South Valley
Flyers, South Valley
School.
South Valley School. So it was really fun.
We'll mention, if you didn't see the social media, we did break ground for Fire Station, New Station 103 last Monday. It's going to be an exciting, over on 129th, just west of 5600 West. So that'll be about a 14-month build, I think they're saying. So hopefully end of next year, we're going to do fire station. So exciting times. Okay.
We didn't actually break Harriman ground, though, because it's too hard to shovel when you're live. We just broke some dirt that was already there.
They imported. Okay. See no further comment there. We will move on to public comment. Audience members at this point may bring any item within the city's purview to the city council's attention. Comments will be limited to 2 minutes. State law prohibits the council from acting on items that do not appear on the agenda. Public comments for this meeting will be also be conducted electronically. Any person interested in addressing the council may submit a comment by emailing recorder@harriman.gov or by visiting harriman.gov/agendas and minutes, where there is a link to fill out an online public comment form. Your statement will be incorporated into the public record. And I will say also, though, Andrew, I don't know if anybody else is here for item 8.2. You are welcome to either make your comment now or we will address it. We thought we'd open some comment during 8.2 as well if you wanted to hear the presentation, the questions. But I know you mentioned you might have to leave, so you're welcome to make that comment now. So we'll take comment both places, just a note there. So at this point, we'll open the public comment meeting portion. Andrew, I do have just your comment, so.
Thank you. Yeah, so my name is Andrew Lawrence. I do have a couple of neighbors that couldn't come. They asked if I could speak on their behalf. Could I have 5 minutes, please?
You're fine, Andrew. Yeah, awesome. You're fine.
Okay. Yeah, so it's actually agenda item 9.2. You said 8.2.
Oh, thank you. Yes,
Yeah, so if you guys haven't checked it out, on the agenda is talking about the MDA for the Crescent piece. As most of you know, that I live behind that piece on Iron King Drive. We had a notice a while ago, and we had our planning meeting, and we had a pretty good turnout. A lot of our neighbors came. And to be honest, it sounds really great. We're really excited for this. This sounds like, you know, the best case scenario. Really good neighbor that they're going to have good hours, low impact on us, and things like that. We did have a few questions and a few confusion things. There was some confusion. There was a part where Michael said that they're, instead of having a fence, now they're going to have like a berm or landscaping. And then there was discussion about some images that were going to be sent to the council for you guys to review. And then Jackie was able to point out that it was in the packet, but it didn't look quite like a berm. So that's my confusion. Are they going to have just landscaping, or is there going to be some kind of height to it, and what are the dimensions and things like that? And then also some of the confusion, this piece is going to be in part of that Crescent piece, but it's still unclear what the rest is going to be. So a lot of us are concerned, well, this sounds really great, but what about the rest of it? Is there going to be, are they going to have this berm or landscape all the way across? Is there going to be some other things that are going to go in there that we might not necessarily feel comfortable with, that kind of thing. But our biggest concern throughout this whole process has been the soil. Those of you that don't know, that soil was brought here by the developers when they developed a lot of Harriman. From Kennecott, there's a lot of lead and arsenic in the soil. And there was a lot of confusion about who's responsible for this land. At first they were saying like, oh, it's EPA's responsibility, and then it's the state's responsibility. And so I called EPA, I called the state, and they all kind of said, oh no, this is Harriman's responsibility. You guys have complete jurisdiction over it. So there was that confusion. There was also a lot of confusion on some of the limits. So the laws originally put down by EPA said it was like X amount of lead, but then the laws in Harriman were higher. So I kind of like had to like ask a lot of questions, and then they had like emergency meetings, and they lowered those limits to meet those laws. So there's just been a lot of miscommunication and trying to figure out things like that. A lot of people have said like, okay, well, they're going to follow all of the laws. They're going to follow all the state, local, state, and federal laws. But then around that same time, Rocky Mountain Power at the time was adding some lines through the field, and they didn't do the things that they were supposed to do. They didn't follow the laws. And so it's kind of like that thing of now they're going to do something to this. We still don't know what they're going to do, how they're going to do it. That kind of confusion and worry of just like trusting someone else to take care of it and make sure it's good. I just wanted to kind of bring home that idea that because this is Harriman's jurisdiction and it is the council's ability, since they're opening up the MDA, that you guys, I think it's your responsibility to put in the MDA something about doing this soil remediation safely. I don't know how you want to word it, something about how much they want to take out, how safely, the steps they want to do, but just like leaving it up to, well, someone else's responsibility. I think I'd like to see you guys take that responsibility on yourselves. And finally, just thank you guys so much for being able to be a part of this process. It's been a lot of fun to come to the meetings and talk about these kinds of things. It was kind of rough. I watched one meeting of Councilman Shields' last meeting, and that was kind of a heated meeting, but he seemed very upset and stuff about residents. I hope our pushbacks and things that we're trying to do for our neighborhood and things haven't caused you guys any level of discouragement or things like that. We truly appreciate you guys and are thankful for all you guys do. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. Any other public comment at this time? Okay, seeing none, we'll move into our city council reports. We'll start with Jared.
Nothing tonight.
Okay, Teddy,
Nothing tonight as well.
Sherry.
Same, nothing.
Nice. Tara. Okay, and I don't have anything to report on either tonight. So we'll go to item 8, consent agenda. Look for a motion.
Make a motion to approve the consent agenda as written.
Motion by Sherry,
Second.
Second by Teddy. Jared?
Yes.
Teddy?
Yes.
Sherry?
Yes.
Tara?
Yes.
And I'll vote yes. That motion's approved. We'll go to our discussion and action items tonight. 9.1, discussion and consideration of amendments to Harriman City Commercial Zoning Code, sections 10-3-6, land use categories definitions. We'll go with Blake.
Looking for the clicker. Okay. So we're proposing a handful of amendments to the commercial code. If I can get this to move forward. There we go. So first question is, why do we want to amend the code? Why are we proposing it? First reason is that we have a handful of sites you can see them on the map on the right here, that are circled and highlighted in yellow that are undeveloped but zoned commercial. And so there's some limitations as to why these aren't being developed. Some of the things are topography, visibility. We also have a handful of unmotivated owners. Kennecott, for example, is a mining-first company, and so they focus on that. Some of these properties out west are there to preserve that buffer between the mines, so they're not motivated. So some of these amendments are addressing the things we can address. The unmotivated owner, I don't know how to address that, but some of these ease of access, limited visibility, we're trying to address those things to make these properties a little bit more enticing to develop and provide some services. We'll get into that in a minute. The second reason is the intensity gap. You can see the graph on the bottom. You got the uses, the intensity of commercial uses, and between the mixed use zone and the technology manufacturing zone, there's kind of a gap. You go from not very intense uses to fairly intense proposed uses in there. So there's this gap that we don't allow a bunch of commercial type uses, and it's kind of limiting businesses to come to town or people to grow their home occupation. So we're trying to address that gap too. So here are the goals that we put together when we set out to write this zone. And like we talked about, the difficult properties, opportunities for home occupations. Harriman has a very large amount of home occupations. And we often hear from them that they start to grow. We actually just had one that grew into a flex space down in near Porter Rockwell. Not every business can do that. That's a big space. It's kind of expensive. This zone is proposed to be some smaller spaces that are a little bit more affordable instead of going and renting 3, 4, 5,000 square feet, maybe renting 1,000 square feet. Address that gap issue, provide a cost-effective option. We really want to entice this maker space or microflex to come to town. It's kind of the new buzzword, new thing, and get a lot of questions, people trying to move into that, and we don't really have a place for them right now. And the last one is kind of cool. If you can have a space where you can have a lot of these commercial users, they can collaborate together, and maybe they can build off of each other's skills or tasks, and they can have a lot of synergy in that commercial center. So those were the goals, and then these are the 4 sections. I'm going to go through each one of these sections and highlight the amendments to each section. So we'll start with 10.3.6D. These are the definitions that we've added into the commercial land use. These are uses that weren't in there before. We've defined these, each one of them, and put those into the definitions so that we could add them to the table, which will be the last amendment that I'll go through. And these uses we came up with working with a developer. They're actually here tonight. His name's Kyle, and he has experience in this type of development, and we kind of work together to try to pick uses that weren't in our code that would benefit this type of use and enhance the uses in there. So that's the first section. The second section has 3 slides to it. This is the meat of the commercial code 10-12. And so every one of the commercial style zones, C1, C2, and now CF, have a purpose statement with them. And then, so the purpose statement kind of follows along with the goals. The uses, this is outlining just what's allowed in there. And so we've always used the wholesale or the warehousing as for personal or self-storage. We've actually added self-storage. We've added drive-up self-storage, which is like what you typically see. It's enclosed, but you drive up to it and you pull the door open, put your stuff in and leave. There's also, we had an indoor self-storage, which is more like what you see in the climate-controlled facilities where it's multiple levels, they have an elevator. And so we've allowed those to be used as an accessory use. And we'll get into a sample site design here at the end that'll make this a little bit more clear. But if you have these maker spaces, these flex spaces for businesses, then if you have that and you have the right amount of acreage, then you can have self-storage. And the drive-up self-storage is mostly or fairly limited to the users of the flex space, but then the indoor self-storage is open for anyone, is what the proposal is. And then the conditional use approval, this is typical for any type of zone. As soon as you get to a certain size, you have to go from just a permitted use to a conditional use, and we're proposing just slightly over an acre for that, 44,000 square feet. The next section, the development standards, this follows closely to C2, but has a few more allowances. We had talked about trying to keep the cost down, so what we're trying to do here is dress up the front of the building where it's facing the street or public-facing areas, but in the back, if you have deliveries or trucks, or say a plumber moves out of their home occupation and moves into one of these spaces, they want to drive their plumbing truck in and stuff, the back doesn't need to be as dressed up because it's more of the back of the facilities are used for the people using the space, not the customers and visitors as much. So trying to keep those costs down. We've addressed some parking, making sure that the storefront area has parking for the customers, but then the back side is provided for employees and deliveries and things like that. And then also reducing the landscaping behind so that delivery trucks don't have to maneuver around landscaping islands and things that could complicate that. Setbacks, I just highlighted what's different from the C2 zone. So these accessory uses for the self-storage or drive-up storage could be set a little bit closer to the rear yard, but then if you try to go taller than 15 feet, you have to start moving away from the line. We also allowed for the Planning Commission to give an exception if we talked about topography being an issue for some of these sites. If you have a site that's set down next to the road, thinking of maybe somewhere along Mountain View where the property was lower, you could build taller because you're not going to actually have the taller building's not going to look as tall where it's set in like that. And then the maximum allowable lot coverage is a little bit higher, just mainly because of that landscaping reduction in the rear yard of these facilities. The next section, 10.15.7, is the major corridor sign overlay. This one, the CF zone obviously isn't in there because it didn't exist, so we've added that. We noticed a few other things that could be tweaked to help that out and maybe make that be utilized a bit more. To help it out, the current code has them spaced 200 feet apart. That's pretty close on Mountain View, so we increased that to 500 feet. If these are larger signs, you probably want a little bit more distance. 200 feet is pretty close on a 60-mile-per-hour road. And then the decreased acreage, there aren't many properties that are 20 acres along Mountain View corridor, so going down to 8 and keeping that 500-foot spacing kind of helps out and makes a lot of sense as we've ran through some scenarios with that. And then the last one is the table of uses. So all of these uses listed here are proposed to be permitted in the CF zone, but I broke them into tables to show what's currently not allowed in the C2 or not included in the C2, and then what's permitted and then what's conditional use in the C2. And so this list seemed to make a lot of sense to the staff as we worked through allowing these items into these uses, or this type of use. As talking with the people that have developed in this type of development, they also have an HOA that governs the uses because they want to make sure they don't have uses that smell or produce a lot of trash or something. They want to keep it kind of clean. And then along the bottom, this again highlights the storage as an accessory use to a primary permitted use, and it has to be 5 acres. So running through some scenarios, this is a sample site. This is just a typical 5-acre parcel, what it would look like if you maybe developed along a local and collector road. You can see there's the different size bays for flex or maker spaces. You can see on the entrance in the top right, there's a reception or meeting place. That was one thing we kind of contemplated, was there's maybe a clubhouse type facility where people can come, and maybe the tenants in there can have a space where they can hold conferences or meetings and stuff. And then it kind of gives it a little bit more professional feel. But you can see this kind of highlights how I was talking about the fronts of the buildings. You can see there's storefronts on those units 31 through 42, and maybe 1 through 4 has some storefronts. And then back in behind you have uses that are tucked back in, maybe don't have storefronts. And then the indoor storage facility in the back corner could be back there for whoever wants to come use them. And then those smaller units, the drive-up storage units, are along the property line on the top of the page. And those are smaller, and maybe, I think we'd written that you can't have more of those than you have flex spaces in there. So if there's 40 flex spaces, you get 40 drive-up storage units, and maybe a percentage of those have to be reserved for the flex space users. So this one, if you think about if there were some challenges with topography or access, you can see there's no access along that collector arterial, so there's just one access into this site. That could be one of the limitations of why someone wouldn't have developed the site. And then you can see the uses we talked about, and since the site's 5 acres, they could do all the uses with the storage units and everything else. If it was 4.5 acres, they wouldn't be able to have any of those storage units on there. It would just be the flex space. And then these are some of the photos of what we've been kind of looking at. Bottom right could be the drive-up storage that it'd be short. And the reason for that is if you were like a woodworker or something and you wanted one of these sites and you wanted to store a lot of material, but you didn't want to store it inside your facility and you needed another space, you could rent this space and store your materials there. Or if it's a sprinkler person and they get a sale on their parts and pieces at the beginning of the year, they can buy a whole bunch of them, store them in there, rent the place for 6 months, and then get rid of it when they use all those parts and pieces over the summer. And just, some options there for those type of uses. The middle on the bottom picture is kind of the back of house look that we are kind of contemplating there. Is this would be the non-dressed up side that the employees and the owners would see. Maybe in the top right would be the clubhouse look, where you'd be welcome to the site, and that would be kind of the storefront look too, along the street. You'd want it to be dressed up on the front, but not so much on the back. And then the indoor storage on the bottom right is kind of multi-level, climate controlled, something a little bit nicer. One thing to bring up is the indoor storage. When a few years ago, it used to be allowed in the C1 zone, and it was removed. So now it's currently only allowed in the M1 and M2, and our only M1 and M2 remaining that's undeveloped is on Porter Rockwell and south. So we have all these homes getting built in Olympia, and we don't have anywhere to put indoor or any storage right now, except for the stuff that just was constructed along Mountain View Corridor. So this would allow an option for storage. This isn't applying this zone to any property, so the council would have complete control over where that would go. But so you could change zones to properties per request if it made sense for storage in certain areas. So just want to end here with the Planning Commission. This went to the Planning Commission on September 17th. There was a notice. I put a notice. It was just posted at the library and City Hall because there were no neighboring properties, because we didn't have any specific property for this. And then the Planning Commission recommended approval for these amendments with a 5-1 vote. and the dissenting vote was regarding self-storage. So be happy to answer any questions, and yeah, that was a lot of words, fast, so.
Thoughts from council, Sherry?
No, I was just a little bit confused on page 83 when it talked about reselling. My concern was pawn shops, but you redefined pawn shops completely separately on our packet. Because it says reselling means the retail sales of merchandise after the buying, selling, or trading of the merchandise. And I was like, well, isn't that a pawn shop? But then if I look up higher, it's clearly defined pawn shop. So reselling and pawn shops are defined differently, correct?
Yeah, I think reselling would be more like clothing,
Sports
like,
Connection.
yeah, something like that. Yeah, I was thinking clothing or sporting goods or things like that. Yeah, played against sports stuff.
For the self-storage, I saw it was for the owner or for a leasee, but like how many leasees could there be for one unit? Like, or do you anticipate like the self-storage would really just be for like 1 or 2 people instead of like 10 people, or per unit?
So the drive-up self-storage, originally the discussion was to have it only for the users that are in there. But talking with people, there could be, I don't know, some vacancy issues there that they'd like to be able to keep those units used. So maybe you slide that down and say, and the council would probably need to dictate this, like 50%, 60%, 75%. I don't know that number, but some of those would have to be reserved only for those, but then the others could be rented out to other people is the idea, just to keep that vacancy rate from.
But it doesn't say that in number
But
2.
per unit, like how many
Oh.
people could be using
Oh.
like indoor storage per unit? Could it be like multiple?
I think the HOA would probably manage that, but there's probably, any self-storage area has like a no subleasing agreement usually is what I've seen, so
Okay.
they'd have to negotiate that. I don't know. Kyle's here, and if you would like to hear from him, he's managed some of these facilities too.
That
As
helps.
far as requiring,
You pull your mic, sorry.
as far as requiring owner occupied, to me, it's just not realistic to say this percentage, who's gonna police that, who's gonna enforce that?
But it says that in the package, isn't it number 2? It says use of drive-up storage units shall be restricted to owners or lessees of the primary use tenant space.
Yeah, and so that's
Well,
where
lease
we'd probably look
is-
for the council to maybe strike or change that in your motion,
Okay.
if you choose to approve
Because
it.
it seems like it restricts it in that language, right?
Yep.
So, yeah, I don't think it should be
Councilman Henderson's
restricted.
exactly right. The
Yeah.
policing of that is hard. I think we'd leave that to the HOA.
Yeah, I agree.
And then what do HOA fees, maybe this is my question for you, like run on it? Because if we're doing this specifically to make it affordable for people in this stage of their business, is a HOA fee going to add a lot of money on? Is that a question for later?
I don't know the answer to that, but yeah, it's probably just they're managing uses, and it's probably paying for, there's private roads in there, it's common space, I guess, so the common space would be maintained, maybe that welcome room where there's the meeting space and stuff, that would have to be owned by a group or individual, like it wouldn't be, I guess you could have the business, but, so yeah, the HOA would be paying for some of that management.
It's probably not an HOA, it's probably some sort of condo association, because they're not homes, these are
Yeah.
are buildings, there's,
It's probably the wrong term.
right,
Property
there is a
management
property
fee.
management, if it was all leased, right, it would be that common area,
Yeah.
a CAM fee that people are paying. So it's just, I just want to clear, we're not talking about homeowners associations, there's probably some other term, and I don't know what that.
Yeah.
There'd have to be cams, they're gonna have to do asphalt, striping, all those kinds of things will have to continue to be maintained.
Yeah.
And when it comes to cost of those things, that's beyond our purview,
Yeah.
right? That's for the businesses to run and make available. Really, our only role in commercial development is zoning. We don't own the land, right? We're not operating the businesses. All we're doing is assigning zoning. So the idea of this is simply, we've identified kind of a gap in our zoning to allow certain uses. Putting this tool in place allows us to use that zoning tool in areas where a property owner might want to use that use, where they currently couldn't under the current zones that we have. Is that?
Yeah, I think the two key pieces are that a lot of these uses are allowed in the M1, but they're lighter uses in the M1, and they're not allowed in the C2. So not zoning something M1 up here in the middle of town, but turning it into CF allows for those lighter uses, and then you also get, the second part of that is the building standards. You don't have to wrap the whole building in brick and stone. You can make the back be a little less, so you're bringing some of those costs down, and I think that's where the zoning can control and do some of that, but not go so far as to say you have to rent to this person and you have to charge this much.
And right now, we're talking about just the zone, not the application of the zone, correct?
Yeah, if this were approved tonight, I'm pretty sure in the next month or two, we'd be getting an application to apply it to a piece of property.
It's a tool, another tool in our toolbox. We don't have to approve it, that rezone.
So to that end, and this is just, I guess, I'm a little long in the tooth, the experience of doing these things, right? So the process, right, of applying the zone, and I'm going to speak to this a lot more in item 9.2 and the unintended consequences when you have permitted uses and conditional uses, et cetera. But by applying the zone, if we approve this zone, it doesn't mean we have to use it, right? So a property owner then comes in and says, I have this piece of property located here. I'd like to use that zone here. And we have to look at that and say, okay, does that zone fit for the characteristics of the surrounding property owners, right? So our job as a legislative body is to balance rights. So you hear this all the time, property rights. I own this property, I can do whatever I want. Well, what you do on your property affects my property next door, and that's largely our job when it comes to this part of it, is balancing those rights. So when we look at the uses, right, the uses involved in that we allow in this zone, if we apply this zone, those are the uses that they get to do. Like, that's the end of our involvement, that's the end of our restrictions, is if it applies in that zone, they can do it, right? It doesn't come back to us to where we have to approve the particular business, et cetera. If it's one of those categories that's allowed there, they get to do it. So hopefully that maybe helps with general understanding. Anybody that's watching, any of us that are going through the decision-making processes, sometimes it's confusing what part of the process we're in. This part of the process is simply there's a gap in our zoning that we don't allow some of these uses that it might apply. Do we want to put this in? So with us looking at the zone, we have to look through those different uses and try to foresee complications, right? Are there some of these that aren't compatible? And we can largely address that when someone applies to use it. Then we get to say, yes, we'll apply this zone there, but we can put some further conditions on it, right? Due to its proximity to other uses that are already there, then we want to strike a few of these other uses off there because they're not a great combination with what the other properties. Does that make sense? So really all we're talking about tonight is, do we want to add this as an option for a property owner to request it to be zoned as? And then when someone makes that application, that's where we have that conversation of how it's applied to that particular property and maybe what else needs to be restricted or allowed.
Yep.
So to that point, any uses that we would like to remove at this point? I didn't see anything that stuck out immediately. Any uses we'd like to strike from this list now?
I actually prefer that they're permitted, because then there's always the ability, like Jared said, to do a ZC and have a zoning condition. So if we feel like, yeah, it's permitted, but it doesn't apply there, then when we approve the zone, we just put a zoning condition on it. But they don't have to go through as much process as they do through a conditional use permit.
So these are all recommended as permitted, correct,
Permitted,
in the
yes.
new? So these would be all. So there's initially no conditional uses in,
It would be the storage.
just the storage? Okay.
Yeah.
So, and here's the thing with the conditional use, and this is a lot of what I'm going to talk about in the next item, is if there's a conditional use, then they have to ask for permission, but they pretty much still get to do it,
Yep.
right?
Just a big
And
process.
unless there are some real reasons that you can legally back yourself up to deny them in doing that, if you've made it a conditional use, that condition would be, say, sound mitigation, light mitigation, those types of things. not, we don't really like it right there.
Right.
Right? You can use it conditioned upon remediating some of these, I would say ambient concerns, right? They're kind of in the periphery a little bit. You can't just say, no, we don't want you to use that there. If it's a conditional use, they're going to get to do that.
Okay. Any other concerns? I'll look for a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve ordinance number 2025-21, amending the Harriman City Land Use Code to adopt the CF Commercial Flex Zone as associated standards.
Oh,
Did,
there's that number 2. Do we want to address that in your motion?
yeah,
To where it would prohibit?
yeah, and changing the language to where the owner should have,
That section about.
yeah, to strike the section of any prohibited units for leases.
Okay, motion by Teddy,
Second.
second by Jared. Tara?
Yes.
Sherry?
Yes.
Teddy?
Yes.
Jared?
Yes.
And I'll vote yes. That motion carries. Thank you, Blake. And thank you guys for your work on that.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, I was thinking of how to word that.
Okay, we'll go to item 9.2, review and consider a proposal by Larry Myler, Harriman 73 Partners, to amend the Crescent Commercial MDA to allow warehousing and general wholesale activities as a conditional land use, modify buffer and residential land uses, and require compliance. Clint, welcome.
Thanks. Good to be with you tonight. So this, of course, is on the, what we've referred to in the past as the Crescent piece of property, just along Harriman Boulevard, just to the north of us. It's Zone C2 currently. It is under an MDA in conjunction with the AMSD MDA as well. It's surrounded on the north and east sides, obviously, by residential. Total site's about 15.5 acres, and the portion of the property that is specific for the development that could take place, or the likely development, is in that highlighted area there. This is just a conceptual site plan of what is being proposed for that area. Again, Harriman Boulevard is to the right of this, that angled road. And yeah, you can see the building, and there's obviously on the backside of that, there's loading docks and some access roads around it. So there's 3 items that we're considering tonight, adding a use, and then amending some of the development standards in terms of the landscape buffer, and then the architectural finish of the building as well. So the first one, adding this use for warehousing and wholesale in general. It's currently not a permitted use in the C2 zone, and this would, by MDA, allow it to occur, but would limit that to only this crescent piece. It couldn't go outside of, just because we're allowing it on this crescent piece doesn't mean that everybody in the C2 zone now gets to do warehousing and wholesale, because it's restricted by the MDA. So that pink portion of the building.
Just a clarification on that, 'cause it's one of my main questions, and I know that of residents. So as it's written right now, currently proposed, this change would only apply to the picture shown, and the remaining part of the crescent piece is still C2, or all of it would be under the same umbrella?
Yeah, it would. So this would apply to the entire crescent piece. Currently, this is their only proposal now, but you're correct. In the future, if they decided to develop more, they could develop under the standards that we're approving tonight. So in the picture here, my understanding is that pink portion of the building will be utilized by the main occupant of the building for their warehousing, and the remnant of those buildings facing the parking will be, office type uses, retail, and some other uses as well. The second one has to deal with the buffering. So in a C2 zone, typically we require a 15-foot buffer from commercial to residential. That also includes a 6-foot masonry wall. In this instance, similar to with the Lifetime Fitness building that we looked at a couple of months ago, they're providing more buffer than is required. As you can see on the east side, they'd have about 98 feet to the building. and then on the north side, they'd have about 66 feet to the building, and 24 feet on the south side from the edge of the property. They go up a heavily landscaped berm, and till you get to that drive aisle, it's 24 feet. And then on the opposite side, you've got about 24 feet as well, 38 feet to the end of the parking islands. So the proposal is, in lieu of doing the 15-foot landscape buffer with the masonry wall, that they would increase the buffer and do away with the wall and increase the landscaping on that berm that goes from the residential up to the commercial property. In effect, buffering and kind of mitigating the impacts of that development on the residential neighborhood. In the past, we've seen issues with double fencing where when we used to require those masonry walls adjacent to residential to get everybody's sign off, and is the first issue, and then coordinating when they're going to put the fence in, when homeowners are going to be around for the work to get done, so that dogs, pets, kids aren't sent loose when their original fence is taken down and their new fence is put up. So we do allow double fencing, but in this regard, where they're providing this excessive berming with a landscape similar to that, again, the Lifetime Fitness building, we felt that this approach was also something that we could consider here.
Will you define what you mean by berm? Because if I look at this picture, it looks like a great ramp to go down into somebody's backyard. It doesn't seem like an elevated berm that prohibits traffic to go through it. It looks like a ramp down into their backyard.
On that question, same question. What's that elevation change from pavement or asphalt of the site down to the backyard fence?
And I'm not sure what the elevation is. That would have to be worked out during the site planning of the building and the site and everything. And you're right, in terms of berms, you usually get a hill. This would be, I guess, on the upside of the hill, right? So none of all the parking and stuff would take place at the top of this berm. Looking from residential to commercial, you would have a heavily landscaped hillside, I guess you could say, that goes up to that commercial, with trees, shrubs, to kind of, in essence, block a lot of the views and a lot of those negative impacts from the neighborhood.
How high is that incline?
And that's what we're not sure. I think we'd have to address that at the site plan phase, where the grading and stuff hasn't been done on the property. I think we're not settled, as far as I know anyways, in terms of how high that.
But I guess back to my original point, it still is a ramp down to a property. It's not a protection of a berm. It is.
And one of
I
the
understand what you're talking about, landscaping and things like that, but it feels like if you
There's any
hop the
stormwater
curb,
problems.
there's nothing stopping you, a tree or something, but you're gonna end up in somebody's backyard, because I know those nice little vinyl fences aren't gonna stop anything.
And we did something similar on Lifetime, but there was a fence and different barriers. There wasn't a drive lane.
It was an actual berm.
Elevated berm, it wasn't
It wasn't a ramp, it was an elevated berm.
Yeah.
Right.
So, yeah, and those are good points. Just one of the thoughts that we've had during this process is we're, on the top where you have a drive, if they installed maybe some kind of barrier there, whether that be a masonry fence or some other type of barrier that would keep cars from, rolling down the hill or something like that. I don't think that rear access is anticipated to be used very much. But I think it's mainly going to be used for a fire access is what I've understood. But, if that's something, these are all considerations that are in your hands to change and amend, so.
Does this also help them not excavate more dirt or haul off more dirt?
Not necessarily. I think it's just due to the kind of the nature of the site.
Yeah.
Okay, keep going, we'll come back to this,
Okay,
yeah, because
all
I
right.
think there'll be some discussion.
So the
on that.
third item here just refers to the architectural component of the building. Below is what they're kind of proposing. It's largely a tilt-up concrete building, painted as well. In the one of the things that we just noticed today as we're going through the ordinance is that in 1031, that's the AMSD zone. And there's two parts of that zone that speak to architecture. One is referring to AMSD uses, which are the car dealerships. The other one refers to other types of buildings. But that's specified in exceptions to the C2 zone. So just to clarify any, being the planner that's probably going to have to look at buildings when they come through and making sure that they meet standards. We're just recommending that a small change be made in the code reference so that it actually refers to those exceptions in the C2 zone. There, like I said, the building is going to be a tilt-up concrete, which is not permitted in the C2 zone, but is within the AMSD zone provisions, if that makes any complicated sense. So,
Kinda, sorta.
that being said, this was reviewed by the Planning Commission on the 17th and recommended.
Sorry, let me go
in full
back to that
approval.
point before we go too far.
Okay.
Just to clarify. She just threw out a bunch of terms and exceptions. I don't like exceptions, so let's be specific on that. So it would be a tilt-up, which is in the AMSD, not the C2, which is where we're at. But then as far as the architectural standards, where are we? So I'm thinking like front
So-
of building.
So the MDA, so the Crescent MDA, it states that there's certain provisions, certain exceptions. So this was established when the MDAs were established, right? So it states that there are certain exceptions to the C2 zone. One of those was an architectural component, so they didn't have to do the 60% brick and stone on all the buildings. And it provided this element of doing the tilt-up concrete. That's already established, that's in the zone currently now. So all this amendment would be doing is just pointing to that provision in the ordinance saying this is what we're gonna follow on this site.
Okay.
So again, it wouldn't apply to any other C2 zone or
That makes
anything
more
else.
sense.
This
Okay.
is specific to the Crescent.
Thank you.
Yeah, if there's any other questions, I know there's been a lot of neighborhood input in regards to the soil contamination. I am not a soil contamination expert, but Bryce is, so he can answer all of those questions. And we have appreciated the community coming out and commenting, and we feel like it's been a positive experience so far. Hopefully that continues. But any other questions on the amendments before you now that I can address?
Not right now. I think we've got a few.
A whole ton of things I know.
Yep.
Sherry does.
Yep. Okay, we'll talk and we'll bring you up or applicants if we need to. And yeah. Jared, you want to start?
You sure?
Yeah?
Yeah, you have all mine too, so go ahead.
Okay. Where should I start? Nothing's as easy as it seems on the surface, right? So on the surface, as the residents have said, we kind of like this particular use and this particular user, and as do we. But there's pitfalls from that because it's just on the surface, right? So going back in time, we kind of wrote this particular section of the MDA specifically for a particular user already, right? This was, and those exceptions were specifically for a boat dealership that had to have this piece to use as their storage. And that's how this came to be, and that boat dealer was coming for shore, and we just need this to get through right now because they are just waiting to break ground, and never happened. So having one particular user in mind is great, but what if that doesn't happen, and what if they move in the future? I'm assuming that this is a lease, not a purchase of the property, right? So we're still dealing with the actual
purchase.
But even
Purchase.
if it is a purchase, it doesn't control a future sale or reuse. of
So
the
it
property.
makes me feel better if it's if it is an actual purchase versus a lease, because then that person's invested in the land, but that doesn't mean that their business stays there, right? Then they have two businesses. So if any of you have a business and you operate an office and you own the office building and you operate your office out of part of it and you lease the rest of it, and then and I do this with a lot of clients, done it myself. And at some point, I'm I don't want to be in that building anymore, and I'm going to let somebody else use it, and I'm going to take my show down the road, right? So my point is that the particular end user will change over time at some point, whether it's this particular one or others, and I think it was already mentioned right there. This user would use this area, and the other would be for these other uses. That speaks to that already, and that's normal business practice. I just want to call it out that it's probably not just the one business that's going to be there. And if everything works out perfectly, that particular business won't be there forever. There'll be others. So my point is we need to look further down the road, right? Have a little bit of foresight. What happens later, not just right now, but what happens later. As we look at the MDA, what are the provisions we need to put in there to make sure that the, kind of going back to the other zoning conversation, that the underlying uses remain compatible, right, for those residents that will be there long term. So that's kind of number one, is I've heard lots of excitement about the particular user. I think we kind of have to go beyond whoever the user is and really focus on the use and the impact on the people around it. And then I have a bunch of questions, right? So number one is, I would absolutely have to know the details on the buffer to the residents. Not knowing the amount of that incline is a big issue, and the fact that it's not a berm, it's just inclining that to a usable height, right? That's not the same purpose as a protective berm to separate the uses, right? And that's great that it's set back north. That absolutely helps for sure. I mean, 98 feet versus 15 feet, 66 feet versus 15 feet.
I love that.
Definitely is helpful. But if we're talking about a steep slope, that would be why there's such a distance. And then we have the other problems that we talked about. We'd really have to be specific about what that buffer is. If we're not going to require the masonry wall, what are the specifics? What's the height, right? Should we actually require a separated berm and vegetation on the berm? And then do we put in the MDA requirements to maintain it to a certain standard? And here's the thing with the MDA versus zoning, and I apologize, this is maybe going to go a little all over as we cross over a few purposes here. But what we're doing right here is zoning via MDA versus an actual zone. And that can be a good thing, but it also can be a bad thing, right? So the zoning process, you have to go through a separate process to apply the zone and a separate process to apply an MDA with building standards. Here we're trying to do it all in one. We're kind of bypassing the zoning process and basically applying a zone using the MDA, which we can do, but it just means we have to include everything we can possibly think of into the MDA, because that's all that matters. And if you read through it, every one of these MDAs says it, and this one does, that if there's a conflict between zone and whatever else, the MDA rules, right? So we just need to be cognizant of that fact and really think about the details. The berm, or the buffer is paramount for the residents, right? If you've bought a home, you've invested heavily, right? That's where you are, that's where we have zoning, especially the single-family homes, et cetera. So we need to do our job to buffer those uses, right? Balance those rights. We want to see this be used in a proactive manner. This is as good a proposal as we've seen come through on this area, but I think we've got to be really, really careful on that buffer part and make sure we have all the details included in it. The use, the warehousing, and is light manufacturing involved in there? Or is it just warehousing and
Warehouse
retail?
and wholesale.
Wholesale and warehousing.
Wholesale, so good. If there's no light manufacturing, that makes it a little bit better. So if it's just some wholesale and warehousing and retail, I think that's a really good use of that space. And those sorts of things should be protected, I think, that way. So for me, the bigger thing is the buffering. We need more details on that. And then and that use, I don't have it. I don't know about anyone else. I don't know if the public that's watching or listening has any heartburn about that use being extended to the rest of the area. I don't necessarily. As long as in the MDA, all of these things apply and we have to think through that, the next user sort of thing. sorry, I'm just going through my checklist. The soil remediation. So a couple of things I've heard. I watched the planning commission meeting last month. I've had communication with a couple of the residents involved. There's a couple of things there I think that we need to really drill down on, and I actually agree. It's an MDA, it's an agreement. We can two parties can agree to anything that we want to. While some things, yes, are governed by laws and other organizations, there's parts of it that we're responsible for as well, and we can put in the MDA to make sure that it happens. So to that end, a couple of the questions or things that have been pointed out, a big question for the residents is to what level, right? What height is it going to, is the soil going to come down to, right? Right now, those berms, they're capped very high, and that's all soil that's been added. What I've heard from, I haven't spoken to the owner of this particular business, but the same thing we're doing in MDA. It's not just this building, it's going to be the next one that gets built, right, to the west of it, or potentially more than one. What level is that going to, is the building going to start from, right? We just saw that picture that showed an elevation. We need to know what that elevation is and to what extent it's going to be taken down to, for one. And then as far as the remediation, yes, there's all kinds, as we've all been on this, with the exception of Tara, long enough to hear a lot of different levels that things have to be remediated to. It seems that changes a lot, from particulate matter to administration to how the EPA decides that they want to apply it, et cetera. There's some variation there.
For this one, it's commercial. So the residential has a lot of concerns because the EPA is trying to change requirements right now for residential development. The commercial, we're setting our code with what it is. It's 4,000 parts per million lead.
Is that the current EPA standard? I know that's what our code says, but that may not be the current standard.
We asked the EPA specifically in our last meeting with them, and they did not answer to commercial, and they said that our code was sufficient at that time.
So this is perfect segue into my point about this is,
No, it's not.
right, is that, all right, if it's commercial and if we're agreed that 4,000 parts per million is the level that it should be, I'm of the opinion that we should put that in the MDA so that there is no confusion, there's no ambiguity, there's no pointing to this agency or that agency or the other one or whatever standard. If we're agreed that that's what it is and that's what we're telling residents, then that's what we should put in the agreement.
So I would hesitate putting hard numbers in because the EPA standard can change, and
So here's the thing.
we
if
do
put-
have to meet the current standard.
So here's the thing, part of that, and we do this all the time with agreements, is it is to the more restrictive of the two, right? So if we're agreeing that it's at a minimum 4,000, if there's a standard that's more restrictive than that, we're gonna have to do that, they'll have to do that, but at a minimum, the surrounding property owners can rest assured that at a minimum, that's what it's gonna be, right? So I think, to me, that's just prudent. That does away with any question marks. That way our residents have a level of assurity that that's what it, at a minimum, that's what it would be. If more work is done and the EPA comes out and says, you know, we actually think that needs to be a much higher number, remediate to a lower number, then it should be the more restrictive of the two. They'd have to do that anyway, but that would give people peace of mind that there is a minimum that's in the agreement, and the MDA rules, right, that supersedes anything else that says they wouldn't have to do it to that level. So for me, that's number one. That just makes sense. The level, right, the level that they're starting the building from, we all need to know that. Sorry, go ahead, Bob.
I was going to say, if you want to reference the code and say the city code or higher based on EPA, it's section 1015.1 in the city code.
10.15.1.
City code. The issue I'll have with, at least for me, moving forward this tonight versus continuing it, is knowing the actual elevation is huge. Like, we need to know where the building starts from, what that incline is, like how high is this gonna be sitting up. That goes to the buffer, like we need real details about the buffer for the residents.
So just really quick on that, currently in the MDA, it does state that if the buffer is not removed, or if the dirt anyways is not removed, which I don't know if that's even an option, but if it's not removed, the building height maximum is 30 feet. If it is removed, then it would just refer to the C2 standards, which is 45 feet. But again, I'm not sure, you know, if,
When you say removed, are we talking original zero grade?
I don't know, it'd probably have to be until, you know, till safe standards or.
Because original grade, I mean, certainly some of this contamination has had seepage into the original soil, so it'll be interesting to know
That would
exactly.
still be remediated, but they wouldn't necessarily have to build.
Bring it up to
Starting there,
grade.
they could, so, I mean, to me, those are kind of two different things, right? Is where they start building from and the details of the buffer, right?
Yeah.
The height of that, to me, at least makes a big difference for a couple reasons. And when you say, well, runoff and things, that'll be handled by the parking lot, you know, famous last words. If there's ever a system failure or something, all of that's going down into somebody's house. So we need to make sure that we need to take away any, sorry to use the word, but any ambiguity, right? We need to button down everything that we can. To me, the litmus test is if your home was on that side of the fence, what would make you feel good about this, right? And I would want to know specifically what that's going to be.
Yeah, I was gonna say, we do have homeowners on the north side, but then there are all rental units on that west side. So it's a huge impact to people that may not know that they're at risk at this point in time.
Yeah, good, excellent point. So for me, those are the two biggest things is really nailing down those two things. And part of the cleanup, I guess this is part B of that, right? So for me, the biggest thing, the cleanup, and second, the buffer. I've hit the buffer enough. The cleanup part, so if we call out, right, minimum, so it needs to be the more restrictive of the two. And then second, who's responsible for the oversight of the process?
So that's the operable unit 3. So in the EPA's record of decision, it's clearly stated Harriman was given institutional controls over any contaminated soils in the operable unit 3. So we had to adopt a standard, which we did in our code, that's 10.15.1, and that was one of the requirements of the ROD, was to adopt a standard and then adopt a process. And so we have a process that's outlined in our engineering standards. And so that's what we've had everyone follow that's done cleanup to this point. And we have to report to the EPA every 5 years, a summary of what's been done. And so all that's publicly available, all the reports.
Perfect, and that helps, I think that will help clear up some confusion between the two. When we say that we're pointing at the EPA and they're pointing at us or the state, et cetera, well, that part I think is the standard, right? So what is the level it has to be cleaned to? And that's why if we set a minimum, right, it's our minimum or theirs, whichever is more restrictive. And then second, who's responsible for the process? We know it's us, we have standards, we have a process to follow. Then we need to make sure that we do. Right, they've all cited, you know, one particular instance where a contractor didn't necessarily. And this might not be you might not be able to answer, but how, I mean, if that's on us, what do we need to do differently or better? If it's not on us, how do we hold the contractors accountable, et cetera?
And I talked to the Planning Commission, because that item was brought up in the Planning Commission. I believe part of the issue with that one was that went through a different approval process because it was a utility company coming in under their franchise agreement with a land disturbance permit. And so our review team on that one was processing a large amount of land disturbance permits. And I don't remember if they identified it during the process of when they were digging or after it was all done. But it was a miss on staff because it went through, if it's new development, it'll
It
go
wasn't
through our
a
development team
development where
process. and
it
we're-
triggers it
Yeah,
automatically.
the development team, review team is well aware of the contaminated soils. The public works inspectors that are reviewing the land disturbance permits aren't as aware of them. So we've cleaned up that process since then, we've looked at them, but that was one that we we had missed in staff because it went through that different process.
That's
So
good to know.
If, Nathan, if we could maybe just come full circle on that one and brief council on what we've done to address that process internally, just so as I'm talking to my residents, I can tell them, yep, this is what it was, and this is what we do now, and that shouldn't happen again, just so I'd have that detail.
Okay, so I'm hearing two concerns, berm, soil, any other, any additional
I guess-
concerns?
Those are the main things on my list.
Yeah, mine too. I guess just making sure, I kind of feel like the discussions that I've had very minimal discussions on this, but it kind of feels like the residents are sold on a user, and I just want us to be very cautious of that, because it's like, well, it's only going to be 8 to 5 business, and it's going to be quiet, but we're opening this up to warehousing and wholesale. There's no restriction on exactly when they can operate, exactly when they can't. I just
So-
want us to, go ahead.
So it is being approved as a conditional use. In the MDA, it does state that the conditional uses per the MDA are done administratively, so it wouldn't come to before the Planning Commission. But if that is a concern that you would like to raise, that's something that certainly, staff is also, we're keenly aware of those kinds of things. So during that conditional use process, that's a condition that we could impose on the property or on the developer, on how it's operated. Setting business hours is always something that, we look through all of our detrimental impacts and assess, how is this going to impact this, that, and the other. And even though it doesn't come before the Planning Commission, as a staff, I think that we're fairly sensitive to those, and we could probably address most of the concerns. If there's things that you're specifically wanting us to look at during that process, we could take those
Sure.
now.
And I guess the difficult thing always is, I don't know what the specific things are, and it's back to tied to who's the user, who's the tenant. We don't have control over it once it's built, per se, a new tenant comes in and they present a different problem that maybe we didn't foresee, so we didn't put a condition on that. And I'm not suggesting that we fix everything right here. I'm just saying that we just have to be very cautious when we're stamping an MDA with different use. And I'm saying this to be very cautious because there has already been promises made on these properties, and it hasn't happened. And so I just want to be extremely cautious of adding more uses on here. Tilt-up are very fast and very popular right now, so we hurry and put up a couple tilt-ups, and then we end up with a mess because we didn't think about some of those things. So I'm very concerned about that.
So in the MDA, there are specific requirements that they're held to architecturally, so they can't just put up any. And I think the building that you're seeing before here, that's the intent. And if you wanted us to include this as as kind of a standard for the elevation, you could certainly do that in motion. But there are other provisions, architectural provisions within the MDA and the AMSD zone that they would
Sure.
still have to meet. They couldn't just put up, some four-sided flat concrete building and call it a day. There is, variation, window openings, those kinds of things that would be required.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting there aren't on that. I
Right.
certainly was part of that process and understand that those are there. It's more usage and things like that would concern me because it's surrounded by neighborhood.
And the conditional use lives with the property. So if another user comes in afterwards and they want to change that use, they'd have to amend that conditional use approval to change hours.
As long as we put it in there. That's
Yeah.
my only,
Make sure it's in
I
there.
just want to make sure that we're thinking about those things. To me, it's like, I can't, to me, this is a continued item because there's too many unanswered questions, but if you guys feel comfortable, you can feel comfortable.
Well, just for the buffer, I think you'd
I'm
have more time
curious
to
on
give
the-
direction on some of those things. As far as operating hours, for other things that we've ran into that are similar, it's hours of operation, but deliveries, trash pickup, right? The heavy, especially with the warehousing, you have trucks coming in and out.
5 o'clock in the morning.
It's those
Stuff you
things,
can't
and if we can
control.
address that administratively, yeah, I think.
But I don't know if you're going to be able to control some of that trash pickup and whatnot.
No.
You can if you prescribe it. We've done it in many cases.
So if I might, Mayor.
Yeah, please.
It seems like one of the questions that keeps coming up in this buffer, I think these are very conceptual drawings at this point. I don't know how much they've done. If you have a standard of a berm height you want, you can say that now. I think continue it and tell them, come back what you want. I think you should just, my professional recommendation is tell them what you want now.
If they agree to it, great. If not,
Don't just continue it and expect them to read your mind. So if you think it's 4 feet, 5 feet, that they need to come up and have a berm to
I
block
think what the
parking, it's up to
neighbors
you.
are expecting is for the soil to be remediated to the original level. right?
Larry, do
So-
you guys want to come up?
So the building's
You wanna
being
come up?
built
Yeah.
from the original level, and there would be an actual berm with vegetation to separate the buildings. I think that's what the residents' perception is, and that's why there's concern
Well,
over the drawings.
So I think we're down to two. I still think, I know,
No,
I think we're down to two items, right? Remediation to your plan. You said you could speak to the plan tonight. I think a berm. I think we're all on the same page. We'd like to see a berm. We can define what that is, and then,
I've talked to Black Clover and Larry Myler, by the way, developer. They don't really have any standard in mind for the berm. If you have a recommendation, what I heard tonight was you don't want a car popping the curb and coming down and hitting a neighbor's fence, and they don't want that either. So I would recommend the berm be 5 feet above the driving area, and it'd be dirt, but then landscaped on top of that. So you'd have a physical barrier, but then you'd also have some decorative.
The actual level at which the buildings will rise from really dictates a lot of that. So
Yeah.
what are we talking?
So we will be lowering it.
Just so you know, specifically, the residents have reached out to me saying, look, we've talked to the owner, Black Clover, and he's telling us that, yeah, they're gonna take it all the way down to the original level and then.
It's going down quite a bit. So soil, I think, is the bigger issue. We've been cognizant of the soil as well. We want to make sure it's moved and done right, and we could have come in and built on top of this. We gave the Black Clover people the choice. I think they wanted to be more street level, and it won't be exactly street level. It'll be a little bit elevated,
What does that
and it will
mean?
probably go up a little bit as it goes back to the
What
homes.
does that mean, a little bit?
Well, 2 feet elevated instead of 12 feet right now, and so it's going to be quite near. Visually, they wanted the building to be more eye level than up on a pedestal, and so. But right now, there's 2 feet of non-contaminated cap on the berm, on the hill. And so that's got to be removed, and then the tainted soil is removed, and then we come back in and we cap again and compact so that the building has a compacted, documented fill to build on. So that's what's going to be happening. But we have hired Brett Cox at Earth Touch. It was a recommendation of the staff. We had 3 or 4 possible people to help, companies to help us on a soil removal plan, and staff recommended, because you've worked with Brett and Earth Touch before, and he's done a lot of work in the city. So he will be creating the plan, and the plan will come back and get approved by the city. I liked what you were saying, Councilman Henderson, about the more restrictive of the two, because frankly, I think the city should always be where the EPA is, and if the EPA is more restrictive, you're probably a little behind times, and you probably should match that. So if we find that that standard is more restrictive than the city, I think you'd move it to match that anyway. And so we would be happy with that language. We want to make sure it's done right. But
Question, Larry? Are you going to remediate the whole lot or just the prescribed area?
we're going to take the whole lot down.
At the first round, at the first?
Yes, yes. And that is done a little differently under the building than it will be under a parking lot. We've got to compact the soil to a certain degree to hold the footings in the building in place without movement. But that's an interesting process. It's a very intricate process. We actually will have a proctor on site every day measuring soil, measuring toxicity levels, and giving us reports. They will come and do more borings than we have done so far, than has been done by the city and by us. And so there will be a better picture of what's under the ground before we even start digging. As we start digging, then there has to be dust control, a proctor to take samples and to measure every day. And it's quite an expensive process and very intricate. I think we'll all be happy with it, frankly. But there will be someone there watching it every single day, making sure that it's being done right and the safety standards are being met. So that plan will come to the city before we lift a shovel of dirt, and it will be approved by the city, and it will meet the standards of the city. And if there's a more restrictive EPA standard, that's what we'll need to hit. So we have no problem with any of that. I think those are all great ideas.
So specifics then, I mean, because the devil's always in the details, so I appreciate your answers, and it's perfectly in line, I think, with what most of us are thinking. I think if we're starting at kind of the original height, a 5-foot berm plus trees and vegetation is great, especially with the setback. But you said raised a little bit, and Sherry pushed back, and like I would want to nail you down to what is that beginning height. That's much more important, I think, to, again, if I were living next door, that's more important to me, the starting point, than the finishing point, as far as height.
Right. So I don't know that is something that I can definitively tell you. What the buyer has told me is we'd like to get it closer to road height and the height of the sidewalk, and that's fine. We're happy to do that. But the MDA says if we don't excavate at all, we can only go 30 feet above the height that it is right now. And if we do excavate down, then we can go 45 feet. I think their building is 35 feet.
35, yep.
33, 35. So we're certainly going to go down more than 5 feet. So I think we're going to end up with a lower building than we could have had with 30 feet on top of where we are now. So I think we're taking 10 feet off the highest point, frankly. I think that's where we're going with it. But the MDA doesn't require a certain height. It's just the height of the building can't be.
But it can, is my point. So
How so?
if we're changing the MDA, then we can change that. Right?
Well, I suppose I'm at your mercy on that one, but we're going to do what the owner wants to do, and we're going to do it safely. So
Again, if I'm living next door and I'm representing the people that live next door, I want to have some flexibility is needed. I totally understand that.
Yeah.
But some amount of certainty is also needed. So, I mean, if you feel comfortable giving a range, yep, we're going to come a minimum of 10 feet off, or we will begin building it no higher than, 4 feet above original grade.
I think do you know where we're at on the height?
Because just to paint a picture for you,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So if you live next door and you have a 6-foot fence and the building begins, right? So
Yeah.
that grade starts at 5 feet and then goes up, right? Everything up there is looking right down into my yard, and everything is casting a shadow over my garden, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Do you know the reduction? Yeah,
They're quite a ways away, though,
Yeah,
too.
it's
right.
6698 is great for the building, for sure, right? But then you've got parking lot.
And I'm not disagreeing, I'm just saying.
If we can have some
So,
where the beginning.
Could you repeat what he said?
Helps all.
Yeah, go ahead, we couldn't
We
hear.
couldn't hear what he said.
so I think we're looking at no more than 4 feet above sidewalk on the front, probably 2 feet. So I think that's our range as a starting point. Beyond that, we're looking at a sheet flow off the parking lot to come down into. Can we get the site plan up again?
That's what I was going to bring up. I think
Yeah.
you're heading there is a lot of the grade for the site, having laid out a lot of commercial sites, is driven by utilities. So you've got storm drain that
back
needs to flow. So that site's going to need to grade out to the street at a certain point. If it's 400 feet deep and it runs at a 2%, you're 8 feet higher on the back of the site. Just to run at 2%, which is hardly any grade, you've got to bury the storm drain pipes and tie into the system that's out in Harriman Boulevard. So
So
it's gonna
again,
be
that
hard to
starting
dictate.
point, it makes a big difference if your house is on the back end.
Yeah, because that's 8 feet at the back end where the house
But
is.
your building's going to be flat, so you grade it a little differently. But
And I like the setback of 66 and 98 point is well taken,
Seemed like a good idea.
right? So hopefully that should be able to taper, and the effects of that is offset. But if we have if we can have some sort of reasonable expectation in there, so that's not just left open-ended,
I think you're looking at 5 or 6 feet to actually get water to flow and utilities to work.
Yeah.
Just with how deep this site is, it's at the finished floor elevation from probably the sidewalk elevation at a minimum.
I think
get that to work?
if you look, I've done this several times, if you look at where the top of the mountain is right now, I believe it's above the height of the fences where the yards are, yeah.
And that's
So-
probably the biggest concern for all these folks is, yeah.
Right, and it wasn't our preference to build on top of that 30 feet. And it wasn't our preference to have fast food restaurants and 24-hour headlights and noise and whatnot. This is probably the best use we could come up with. But I believe we can also step the building, Blake. The building can be stepped slightly as it comes forward. So we can handle the utilities, but I mean, my understanding of what's going to be taken out is we'll be well below the midsection of the fence that's there instead of above the fence that's there. Even
At
in
the
the,
top
even
of the-
in the, even in the back, if you take
At
the
the
top
top of
of
the
where
berm?
top of where we are now and the fence height, I think we're higher than the fence, right? And I believe we'll be coming down to a midpoint in the fence, even in the back,
For your building or berm?
for where we're taking it down to.
And then you'll berm back up?
And we can still have a berm here. I think we should have a berm.
Okay.
But then it's going to slope down to more of a sidewalk level or street level. And that's going to be within 2 feet, 3 feet of that, so. Yeah. It's a lot of dirt that gets removed, is what I'm saying.
That helps a lot.
Yeah.
I think if we get all that in writing somehow, I'm there. Like, I'm 100%. If we have that somehow all in, covered and.
And it's kind of hard too, because even when you're heading west, the road kind of goes down a little bit, so.
It's true.
So you can't probably tie it all to the height of the curb or the sidewalk, but up in this area where the building is, it's flatter.
Where the
And so
access is,
across the front of the building, I think we're not going to have a lot of disparity with the level of the sidewalk. But further west, it drops a little bit, so.
Yeah, and so that, I mean, that's where I come back to, well, there's gonna be basically this equal thing going to the west. Sorry, I don't wanna muddy the water more, because we were almost there. But typically when you build one of these, we're having that slope up even more towards those houses, or are we going to be kind of an even plane for the whole pad and slope this way?
Building's typically that flat. You might be able to step it, and then everything kind of grades away from that. So it should be getting lower as you head towards the houses. on
Right,
your side.
yeah. I think if you go west and look at the height of the pile right now, I think it drops below the fence tops when it goes west, because it slopes that way. Here, on this eastern section, it slopes down to the south. And that's why that detention basin is the tip of the triangle right there, so.
Well, if we're starting within kind of that 2 to 3 feet at street level, and you're, 2% grade up, I mean, that makes sense with some way to, and I get that some of this is just wording to make us feel better, right? But if there's a way to word that to make us feel better and my neighbors to feel better, that would be good regarding that point. 5-foot berm in addition to that, where, I know the questions I'm gonna get, and they're the questions I would ask if I lived right there. Where would the berm be? Would it be closer to the fence or closer to the parking lot?
So whatever.
I don't know if there's a right or
Yeah,
wrong
it's-
answer.
I think what we're trying to do with the berm's two things. If there is any night traffic, we want to block headlights from hitting the residences. So that's why I said 5 feet. Even with a truck, you'd be covering it. Second thing we want to do, I think, from what I've heard, and it makes sense to me, is we want to keep cars from inadvertently going over and down toward the fence. Now, if you look at the site plan, you see that on the far north side of the building, there's very little need for a berm because there's no headlights. Cars aren't ever going to go that direction because there's an emergency fire road that goes east and west. And so we probably don't need the berm there as much as we do where on the west side of the building, there's that parking lot. There's, truck could be driving northward, and we want to keep the berm to keep the headlights down and keep someone from popping the curb and going over toward the fence.
Is there any, on that curb height, is that just a standard curb height?
It is, and you don't want it to be too high, otherwise someone can,
The front
before their
bumpers
wheels
always-
hit it, the grill is going to hit it and it causes damage. So there are standard heights we have to hold to.
So my last question would be, so if we're good with some sort of language for the beginning, street level moving up, or 5-foot berm, then the landscaping, to what standard is the landscaping. Because it's, I mean, the fear is, and yes, any business wants it to look nice, but the fear of the resident is, well, it's just gonna, on our side of the berm, it's just gonna be weeds and whatever, and where will the trees be and all that kind of stuff.
So
If I could answer that, I think if you take the berm out and flatten it out, it would be a planter strip, and you'd want to landscape the whole thing. I think you have to have the same standards, spacing of plants, species of plants. Has to be the same on one side of the berm as the other, right? Because you have to landscape the whole thing, and particularly because neighbors will be viewing it, and so it can't be a pile of dirt on that north side. Has to have landscaping on it.
Our other development that we did that incorporated the berm, we had trees along the top, and then we had more plantings on the berm. So we spaced them, so it ended up giving almost full coverage from the residential.
So if you had trees and bushes and things, so is that, I guess my question is there a standard that we have that they're held to? Is that something that we need to
We
include
have to
in the
incorporate it
MDA?
here, because I think we have standard for frontages, but not along property lines like that. So it'd be more like 30-foot spacing for the top of the berm, and then you do like
I would do, so the C2,
feet between lower down the berm, so you'd have 15-foot spacing.
yeah, the C2 zone does include standards, well, commercial to residential, right? So you have a 15-foot buffer that's required with tree spacing every 20 feet, and that's evergreens, so that, you know, that provides a better visual barrier. So that's the established requirement that we have now for buffering. I mean, in this instance, you know, where it's in an MDA, we certainly have more discretion to increase
Well, I
that.
guess that's my question, is there a standard that applies anyway, or do we just need to say the city standard? What, I'm looking, I don't, like I said, I don't know if there's a right or wrong
Yeah,
answer.
I would think a standard site plan for a planter strip, and it all needs to be landscaped, so landscape. I like the trees on top, I think that's a great idea, but landscaping on the south side and the north side that faces the neighbors. That's what I would want if I was a neighbor, so I think that's what we should make as the standard here. So,
Kara?
Yeah, and then I also would think that berm on all the sides would be important, or like they're facing.
Those two sides.
Those two sides, with they're facing the homes too.
yeah, I think that's the plan. I was only pointing out that the necessity for blocking headlights and keeping trucks from going over the edge doesn't exist on the north side of the building like it does further west of the north side of the building. Does that make sense?
But
I
still
think
along
I
the
think it's
whole
going to go
side.
around the whole thing.
Okay.
I think that's
Yeah, I'd like to
the plan.
the whole thing.
Yeah.
I don't care about the south side, you know, on the,
We wouldn't need to berm the west side for future development, though.
The
No,
east
the-
side, sorry, my bad.
east side,
Yeah, yeah,
east
yeah,
and
yeah.
north. We need a,
Just on the finished edges next to the other properties.
yep.
East and then north.
So I think we're about there. I'm hearing we're about there. We just need to get the wording. Jared, I'm going to let you and Todd always do the wordsmithing.
Gonna
Well,
try.
I just wondered, did you want to add something about operating hours? Or is
Are
that
we allowed
later?
to restrict, Todd?
Like Clint said, we could do this in two ways. Right now, it's currently a conditional use for what they're proposing. So that could be one of the conditions that we impose upon the property when they do the conditional use application. You could, however, it's not uncommon to have additional standards that as staff is reviewing them, that they're meeting. So you could put in the amendment that the operating hours need to be from 7 a.m. to, I don't know, 9 p.m. or something like that.
Just a question for the attorney. MDAs have a time limit, they go away. Should we have those conditional uses actually live in another part that actually lives beyond the MDA? Not trying to complicate things, but
I like that, actually.
As a conditional use, they would.
Yeah, the conditional use, I think we have language in the standards that say that the conditional use runs with the
it
land.
runs with, so that's, I think I would move, as a staff, I think it would be more comfortable to have it in the conditional use side. I think you could put the recommendation, right now, I think the staff, or the amendment says the city manager or designee agrees to this. I think that's fine, because this may not be the only project that does this, but I think it would be important to either in the MDA or in the, how we're defining the conditional use, to say that you want the berm all the way around, because we don't know what the next user, maybe they will have headlights. So if the berm just continues, it's easier, it's just consistent, it looks the same. And so I just think we just need to spell that out. Because I think we all hope this isn't the only user that goes on this site, right? That
Right.
other stuff continues, so.
For the conditional use, keep in mind, maybe you only want to restrict the wholesale and warehousing portion, because if the front is retail and they have a restaurant or a bar or something in there, they might want to be open later. We talked in the planning commission about possibly having a golf simulator. They might want to allow 24/7 access. So they're maybe only restrict the one warehousing and wholesale use, 'cause
Yeah,
that's the
and
trucks, that's the impact.
My comment was that we would restrict this portion, this use in particular, not all the uses that are listed in.
And I don't
as
think
a
we have to
permitted
go necessarily like 9 to 5, right? I think the residents are going to be okay if they're not traffic after 7. Like truly, I don't think we need to be too restrictive. They're not going to, they don't want trucks back there at 10 o'clock at night, right? But they're not going to, I don't want to be so restrictive that we limit their ability to operate, but they just don't want it after too early in the morning or, so if you're like a 7 a.m. to
7 to 9
7 to 9,
would
like,
be-
I don't think that's, I don't think anybody's going to have that's,
You could also do it for like, the restriction could be for delivery trucks or larger vehicles. Because if you're talking about what you're saying, maybe a golf simulator wants to be open till 10 p.m.
right.
But that's not going to require warehouse delivery type vehicles.
Oh, yeah, you could just limit that, yeah, just deliveries to those hours.
Anyway.
I like that.
just an idea.
Jared, are you working on a motion?
Yeah.
Any other questions while Jared's concerns? Larry, you guys okay with where we're headed? You guys okay?
I think as I've talked to the buyer, I think these are things they would like to do to be good neighbors, so I don't see any problem with it. The first berm they sent in, as a typical, had height to it, right? The one they sent to you, I believe was 6 feet, but I think 5 feet is adequate. So the other thing is this is their corporate headquarters. This is their home for a long time. They've already spent $300,000 on the architecture. They're very committed, and I think it's a use that will keep neighbors quite happy for years to come. That we're
I think it's a
talking
great use, yep. Like you said, I think it's the best use we've had come.
Yeah.
We all wanted the Marine, but I think we ended up in a good place.
Yeah, well, believe me, I wanted them too. And the rest of the property, though, we're still talking to them about that same use that is cohesive with and complementary to the auto mall as well, so.
Okay.
So just in terms of process, just maybe this helps in terms of understanding. So once an application came through for a conditional use, all of these provisions that we're talking about with the berming, the hours of operation,
Soil.
soil contamination, that would apply to the entire property. And so, you know, when we provide a recommendation for this project specifically, we would include the provision that all these requirements apply to the entire property.
Correct.
And if that runs with the land, then any other application that came in after that would have to follow those same standards that the original one was required to follow.
Okay.
God is wordsmithing now.
I'll look to you. I've got bullet points.
That's what I have too. Why don't you read yours and I'll fix it on my side.
Well, mine's much more summarized than yours is, right? So this isn't.
May I be excused to sit down? I think you're done with me, right?
Thank you very much, Larry. So this isn't the motion yet. So the motion would be to approve with the following to be addressed. One, that the soil remediation be done to a minimum of the city's current parts per million standard, or the more stringent or more restrictive of any regulatory agency at the time that the remediation's done. Regarding the buffer surrounding residential properties, that the level of the construction at street level would be no more than what above street level? I'm saying no more than 5, begins at no more than 3 feet, no more than 5 feet. And then, so
Four?
whatever
No
that.
more than four?
Whatever that is, think about that.
He wants four.
4? No more than 4?
So this is for the, as you're driving into the,
From 126?
from 126,
That
you're talking about
entrance.
that elevation going up to the property.
Because that's where the slope would begin for your stormwater, et cetera, right? That,
It might be good to reference like finished floor elevation can't
Yeah,
be
'cause
any
too-
higher than a certain level
Okay.
above.
Back of curb or top of curb, or?
Yeah,
So
back-
look at that.
top back of curb's always the best place to measure off of, because that's not moving.
and then the next one would be that there would be an actual 5-foot berm that is, and the berm, including any surrounding landscaping, would be to what, the C2 standard? Is that what you said?
C2 standards, or, I mean, additional use we could impose. So, I mean, that C2 is a good starting point, and then we can.
So a minimum of C2 standard? Subject to administrative review. That sound all right? It gives some,
Which may be increased upon receiving a conditional use application, something like that.
perfect.
And the berm you wanted 5 feet from the drive park area? Because I think
Yeah.
you said you wanted, okay.
Right, so as Larry pointed out, right, that's what helps kind of shield them from cars in the parking lot.
And then Nathan's suggestion is to clarify that the conditional use standards run with the land, and any conditions imposed would exceed the length of the agreement. And did you want to add any additional standards for that? When we receive a conditional use application, is there anything in particular that you want to be met, that where we don't have to go through a detrimental effect analysis like hours of operation? And do you want to specify those, or do you want to leave that up to a conditional use application and staff will make that determination at that time? It can't be yes to both, Mayor, I'm just saying.
I think per Nathan's.
Yep.
To be on conditional use permit.
Yep, I agree.
So at the time,
At the time of application?
which to me
I agree.
probably makes more sense, because then you know better what's coming in. And
Yeah. Okay. I think I have everything. Do you want me to?
yeah, if you want to summarize, and then I'll say what he said.
You ready, Jackie?
All right, so the motion to approve with the following conditions. The first one, I'll address the berm. The berm shall be 5 feet over the height of the drive or parking area. Any landscaping needs to comply with the C2 standards, which may be increased upon receiving a conditional use application. For contamination, that the contaminated soils need to meet the levels in City Code 10-15-1 or exceed those levels if any regulatory agency recommends a higher level. As far as the elevation height, that the finished floor elevation shall be less than 5 feet. Is that what I'm? 4 feet?
Went back to 8 feet.
But if it's stepped, it'd be different.
5?
The finished floor elevation facing the, what is that one, that street?
You're
126.
trying to keep the building heights down, so you might want to reference finished floor elevation next, closest to the residence. So the highest finished floor elevation,
So,
no more than,
the only thing I would say is, nobody's engineered this site, and the storm water and the sewer have to use gravity. it's a deep site. I would hate to say it's got to be this.
Maybe you put a
We don't
caveat
wanna
in
be
there where
pumping
it's no more than
stormwater.
5 feet unless the city engineer reviews utilities and has to increase it
To minimum
for
height.
gravity systems.
I like that language.
I'm just concerned that we're going to put it in and then go, oh, wait, that stormwater's not going to flow properly.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So, yeah, there might be a caveat to put in there where the city engineer can approve a higher elevation.
So if you're gonna, yeah, it's, like I said, I don't know, there's right or wrong answer. I don't know I'm not an engineer. I have no idea how to.
And every site's different, so. Well, since you won't have a basement, the sewer's there to flow basement, so the sewer's gonna be like 10, 15 feet deep.
Yeah.
It's the storm drain that's running down that I'm most worried about.
At the front of the building? And what's your are you? I think it'll be closer to 3, but I'm just saying. What about at the rear of the building? What's that look like? Rear of the building, well, I mean, the whole site's closed anyway, but take off 6 feet. Okay.
And that has nothing to do with him, that's just the
No, yeah,
engineering of the
yeah.
deep side, yeah.
But if you step your building and you got 2-foot steps, you could add another 4 or 5 feet to your building, pretty easy. Oh, you want to see that? From the street. We don't need to do that for slope. I'm just trying to buffer for slope for gravity. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, so the elevation height, finished floor elevation being no more than 5 feet from the street.
Back a curve.
I'd say TBC, that's pretty close
TBC,
to the,
yeah.
it's like 0.2. It's like 1.5 inches, 2 inches higher than the
Top,
back.
back of the curb. And then lastly, the conditional use standards clarify that the conditional use standards run with the land and any conditions imposed will not terminate with the agreement.
Did we get landscaping?
Yeah, that was in the berm.
All right, so I'm gonna say the motion and then have him repeat that for you since we went all over the place. I'll give him a second to.
Get her fingers.
That way you don't have to go back and listen to it 14 times and figure out where we strayed. Good?
Yep.
Okay, I'll make a motion to approve ordinance number 2025-22, approving the First Amendment to the Crescent Commercial Development Master Development Agreement to permit warehouse and wholesale land uses and modify architectural design and buffer requirements as further described, along with the following provisions described by the city attorney.
Okay, I'll repeat them. For berm and landscaping, the berm shall be 5 feet over the height of the drive parking area. The landscaping shall meet the C2 standards, which may be increased upon receiving a conditional use application. The contamination section, meet the contamination soil levels in City Code 10.15.1 or exceed those levels if any regulatory agency recommends a higher remediation level. Elevation height, finished floor elevation being no more than 5 feet from top back of curb, and conditional use standards. Clarify that the conditional use standards run with the land and any conditions imposed will not terminate with the agreement.
Looking at me, do I get all that?
Okay, I have a motion on the floor.
I've got like 4 different lists that I've checked through, so
I have a motion.
there's my motion.
I have a motion by Jared.
Second.
I have a second by Teddy. Jared,
Yes.
Teddy,
Yes.
Sherry.
No.
Oh, if you want to make it so the city manager and I finalize the amendment. Sorry, because that's pretty helpful for us when we're going through and we're fine tuning it. So, sorry.
Okay, what do I do here, Jackie?
Do I need to restate a motion?
Yes.
All right. So I'll restate that motion, so I'll revise my previous motion, right? So motion to approve ordinance number 2025-22, approving the First Amendment to the Crescent Commercial Development Master Development Agreement to permit warehouse and wholesale land uses and modify architectural design and buffer requirements, along with the provisions to be outlined by the city attorney, and you can add
Previously stated?
previously stated, along with the ability for both he and the city manager to
Make any, effectuate the changes discussed and
finalize
finalize the
language.
language.
Okay, restated motion. Do I have another second?
Second.
Second. Okay, let's do this again. Jared?
Yes.
Teddy?
Yes.
Sherry?
No, but I reserve a time to comment after.
Okay, absolutely. Tara?
Yes.
And I'll vote yes. That motion carries. Sherry, I'll turn the time to you.
I guess I'm not opposed to the thought here. It's the process that concerns me. I've had this discussion many times in the last 8 years, and I remember many times having MDA before us, and there was a war room. Literally, that's the way they categorized the place where the developers were in there having a war room to send on-the-fly changes while we're up here. This is absolutely the first time I have seen any of this. This was never presented in a work meeting. We got an email about, you might see this come before you a while back. I've never seen any details. I got this Thursday with our regular packet. I talked to Lauren and Jared about it today. I just appreciate, because I respect that Nathan and Todd will review this and look at different things, but it's my job to say yes to these things, to know the details and the finite details, the language in these MDAs. And this on-the-fly stuff just makes it so I can't read it and see detail by detail exactly what I'm voting for. And that makes me extremely uncomfortable. I remember an MDA that was a very large MDA, and there was one word in there that said "and" instead of "or," which could have cost the city hundreds of thousands of dollars. Now, the intent of it was "or," and we probably could have argued that was the intent, but there was one word that said "and" instead of "or." But my job is to review all that language, and if I have this on-the-fly stuff, I can't feel responsible about saying yes. I'm not opposed to this development. Actually, quite frankly, we'll be glad to see something happen, because, quite frankly, we haven't seen anything go on. So I hope this actually happens. I hope that all this gets followed through on and it actually happens, because it needs to get done. I think the city has been very fair with these land transactions, and we need that partnership to solidify and get these things done. But I just can't vote yes on something that I can't physically look through and examine it for myself and understand precisely what I'm voting for and feel good about it.
Appreciate that, Sherry.
Can I make a comment?
Sure.
Nathan, thank you for your expertise or professional recommendation to muddle through this for the last hour rather than hear it in another 20, 30 days or whatever that would have been. So thank you.
On that, we're gonna bring this meeting to a close. Future meetings, our next planning commission meetings, next Wednesday at 7 o'clock. Our next city council meeting, the 22nd at 7 o'clock. We've already done our closed session, so all I need is a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Have a second. All in favor?